usual thing. To ReactNYC! Welcome to all the people who are watching us live on YouTube. I imagine it's more than 10. Less than 10? More than 20? I don't know. Okay. Anyways, hi. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming. As you can see, we have nice features today. So we're introducing some new improvements to the meetup pretty soon. Stay tuned for that. This is our Twitter handle. I think you know what to do. I think I can hear myself twice. You go there, you tweet it, and then we retweet it, and then hopefully you'll get new followers, and then hopefully we too get some new followers. We also are recording all the videos from these meetups. We put them on youtube.com/ReactNYC. So first of all, all the live streams from the meetup when we are recording that go to this page. And we also record all the talks. So first of all, I want to say big thanks to Roman, who's doing all the good work and the hard work, recording, editing, creating tags. Apparently it's a huge workflow. We also have a Slack channel, but not just for ReactNYC, but for all front-end meetups and frameworks in the city. It's called NYC.js.org. You can find ReactNYC, AngularNYC, Vue.NYC, TypeScript, a bunch of other stuff. So there are already over 600 cool kids on the block. Join that. Raise your hand if we're here for the first time. Alright, so that's unusual. So for those of you who don't know, ReactNYC is a semi-monthly event. We run these events every 2 weeks. And usually we have 3 to 4 speakers at each event, which means that we need a lot of speakers. So if you'd like to speak at one of the events, regardless if you're a beginner or experienced developer, regardless if it's about an open source product or something that you face at work, please come talk to us. And if you're super shy and you know what to talk about, we'll help you prepare, we'll help you find the topic, we'll help you go on stage. It's exciting. So we have events every 2 weeks, as I just said. Next one is going to be on early July. Stay tuned for the date. We don't have it yet, but the late July is going to be on July 26th. Also, the cool meetup ID is to be announced. Small announcement. Raise your hand if you're using AngularJS. All right. So for those 2 of you who are still using AngularJS, we have a full-day workshop on migration from AngularJS to React. It's going to happen this Friday at our offices in the Empire State Building. If you're interested, go to this bit.ly/migrate2. It's going to be awesome. We also are opening 2 new meetups, 2 new meetup groups. It's going to be more exclusive, not as open as this one. One is Tech Leads Vertex. It's going to be an exclusive meetup for all the technical leaders in the industry, being a CTO, Director of Engineering, Technical Lead. We're going to talk about advanced stuff. We're going to provide shoulders to cry on for all the technical leads. So if you're interested in that, come either to me or to Manon. She is our Director of Community Operations. Another thing is JS Pro. It's going to be an exclusive paid meetup for JavaScript professionals with 3 or more years of experience. No fluff, just advanced stuff. Cool. Raise your hand if you don't know about these guys. Okay, for some of you, it's my company. I saw you. We are basically helping companies do React projects. From development to training to consulting. If you need help with the React project, come talk to me, and we'll try to help you. I want to say a big thank you to Quartet Health. Give them a big round of applause. Thanks for providing this really, really awesome venue. Thanks for providing some of the pizzas. There are still surprises on the way. And I want to invite Mustafa from Quartet to give a few words about what they're doing here.
Thanks for coming, first of all. Thank you, Ilya, for organizing all this. We're really happy that you guys are all here today. Just real quick, I'll tell you a little bit about Quartet and what we do. We're a health tech company. We've been around for about 3.5, 4 years now. We work very closely with very large hospital systems and health insurance companies. They share their data with us. We ingest that data and analyze it, a lot of like machine learning on their data ingestion platform, things like that. We identify people who look like they benefit from mental health care needs. And then we build out the mental health care networks and put into the hands of doctors, patients, behavioral health care providers, all the staff, all the different kind of office people around that to actually facilitate those patients getting into care. And that might ultimately mean that they're seeing like face-to-face therapist visits, CBT online modules, a combination of listening to teletherapy, different kind of mechanisms that we're trying to get people just healthier and really bridge mental health care and physical care in a way that's just not really been done before, especially leveraging technology for us. So all those tools I talked about, the doctors and their staff and everything that people use is all generally on our side, they're all React apps. We have like Node backends as well as like Java API backends. So tons and tons of stuff. We're hiring like crazy. We're growing a lot. So if you guys are interested, drop me a note. You can talk to Teju afterward. Ruby's around here somewhere. And if not, you can always go to our website. So we'd love to hear from you guys. So thanks again.
All right. Another big thank you I want to say is to all of you, all the attendees, and all those people who watch live stream. Hello. Thank you for coming because this meetup is for you. I mean, we can all come and watch YouTube videos, but you all come here, and that's what drives the meetup. That's what allows us to create these meetups every 2 weeks with so much hype. So thank you so much. Give yourself a big round of applause. So I want to say enjoy the meetup, and today we have, as usual, we have 2 speakers, and then we're going to have a break, and then we're going to have another speaker, and then we're going to have a mysterious speaker. So stay tuned for the mysterious speaker. The people who've been at the meetup a couple of times already might know what I'm talking about. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, without further ado, let's give stage to Rubenstein. Got it?
All right. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Oh, there's a little in back. I'll try to speak up. So yeah, my name is Abe. I'm really excited to be here talking to you all at ReactNYC. I am going to be presenting a little bit about a project that I recently built called Today in Public Data, and it uses React, obviously, that's why we're all here, but I also took advantage of a newish framework called Next.js, which a lot of you probably have heard about. It was my first time using it, and so I'm just going to kind of share what I learned along the way of building this project and also introduce you to the Enigma Public API, which is a great source of public data. I'll get into that as I introduce myself in a few slides. But I just want to give you a basic agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. I'm going to give a little overview on what public data is, because I think we all think we know what data is, but in case you're not sure, I want to make sure we're on the same page. Why I built this project, some of the inspirations behind it, and then a little bit of the technical overview of Next.js as well as the public API. Some outcomes, whether they were successes, failures, or I don't even know how to categorize them, and any kind of next steps that I'm going to be working on this project more. It's also open source, so if you see something that you think might be interesting, feel free to find the repo. There's a link at the end of the presentation. I also will add that you guys laughed pretty heartily when someone mentioned AngularJS, so there's an AngularJS shout out in this presentation. So we'll see what happens. And then again, the goals of this are just to understand a little bit more about public data, understand more about Next and Enigma Public, and I think one of the underlying themes of this presentation is this idea of if you have an idea for a new project, it's a really good time to try a new technology that you've never used. It sounds kind of crazy, but you'll see what I mean in a second. So that's the really bright slide that's supposed to wake you up. It's super yellow on my screen, but I just realized it's white there, so that's okay. But I am a senior software engineer at Enigma, and Enigma is basically a data technology company that partners with enterprises and cities alike to solve real-world problems using data. I'm also the tech lead for Enigma Public, and Enigma Public is our sort of not-for-profit search and discovery platform for public data. And so we've gone and gathered a bunch of sources, of disparate sources of public data and put them all in one platform where you can easily browse them through a UI. We also have a great API that is what I use to sort of power the backend for this. I also taught Python briefly at NYU, and I'm an ex-webmaster of a moderately successful Pokemon website. And we're going to get to that in a bit as well. So, as I promised, what is public data? Well, public data is any kind of records or information that's released by government, business, or academic institutions, and it's released into the public domain, which means you can do kind of anything you want to with it. This is really great for journalism. As you've probably known, a lot of the biggest journalistic stories of our time have been related to sort of data leaks, and some of it's public, some of it's not. Public data is tabular in nature. It usually has a schema, so it has a well-defined series of fields and then a number of records. That tight structure is sort of contrasted by the fact that a lot of the text fields in public data are highly heterogeneous, which means that you might have a description of a tax form in one data set in a textual field, and then you might have something like a recipe for banana bread. I mean, it depends on what your source of public data is. And most of the data types in public data are strings, numbers, booleans, geopoints, geoshapes, and of course dates. So that's where I come in. Again, Enigma Public is a platform that you can use. You can go to publicenigma.com and check out public data. You can also use it programmatically through our API. And at Enigma, we are very passionate about public data, so we have a lot of favorite data sets. And by far, one of the most popular data sets with us, as well as our users of public, is something called the Automated Manifest System. This is records for ports of entry to the United States. So everything that comes through, say, a cargo ship, anything that's in a shipping container, there's a manifest associated with that shipment, and there's often a very detailed description of what is contained in that cargo. So I searched for antivirus, and you can see there's like pallets of antivirus software and related products. I don't know what that would be, probably like spyware or something. One guy laughed. That's okay. So the point is, there's a lot of stuff in here, and I want to kind of circle to this concept of what I'm calling fairly well-formed dates. So when we think of a well-formed date, we might think of a timestamp or something that has been coerced to, say, a JavaScript date object. It's something you can rely on that's reproducible. But public data is full of human-entered text, and a lot of times those dates are expressed in various ways. So I have a record here from one of the AMS cargo descriptions. This is actually a record of a service member's vehicle that was transported overseas and it's coming back to the US. So there's actually a date in there. I've highlighted it in white. It's supposed to be yellow again. But the point is that if we're just looking at public data with a date field, we're going to miss stuff like this. So I got really interested, and I was like, maybe I could build something that had a UX based on time rather than categories or content, because a lot of public data portals divide up data based on topic. And that's really cool, but I just wanted to explore what would happen if we looked at it a bit differently. So some of the other inspirations were, the Internet Archive has the great Wayback Machine, which some of you are probably familiar with. It's a way to look at historical snapshots of websites for like any point in time back to, a lot of times you can go back to like 95, 96, which is really cool. This idea of like this day in history, what happened today in the past, or what will happen in the future. Wikipedia, obviously, and then I'm just like kind of a calendar nerd, so Google Calendar. This idea of like what's on the agenda today in public data was literally the thing that popped in my head before this project took off. So this is my buddy, Camillo. He is a friend and colleague at Enigma. I'm just giving him a little shout out because this is where that whole thesis of new project, new framework comes into play. Camillo was talking my ear off about Next.js. He's like, oh, have you tried it? Have you tried it? I'm loving it. Have you tried it? Did this for like a month. And this was the time where I was kind of formulating this idea in my head for the project. And so I was like, all right, fine. I'm going to try this out. And in hindsight, it was immensely beneficial to both my learning as well as just expanding my repertoire of things that I know how to do. So thank you, Camillo. He's really cool. That's his Twitter handle. This is my Pokemon website. So I've kind of defined my, I guess you could call it a career starting at a certain point, but 1999, this Pokemon website with the spiral blue background, that was my, that's the way I learned HTML and CSS and JavaScript in quotes. In 2013, I learned how to use Angular, and I had this really I had a passion for public transit, and I wanted to build something, and a friend of mine was like, oh, well, you could use Angular to do that. And I was like, all right, I didn't know any better. Now I do. And now it's 2018, and I'm using Next.js, which I found to be really awesome, and I'm learning even more JavaScript. And we're going to dive into this app and check it out, and then I'll do a little technical overview, and we'll see where it goes. So it's called Today in Public Data. This is today's data, so you can see all of the dates that are highlighted here. Very faint yellow there on the screen, but if we go down, we can see a sample of a record from a data set, and that highlight indicates that there's a date corresponding to today in that data. So for the Pennsylvania Unconventional Production Report of 2017, which I know you're all familiar with, there is a report for a gas well at a specific latitude and longitude, and the report was generated today. That's kind of cool, right? There's also information about really anything you can think of. One of the more popular things that you see are company registrations. So a lot of companies have a license to operate, and then that license expires or it starts on a certain date. And so you can actually go into the future or into the past and see, like this company started business on this day, or this company's actually, they need to renew their license because they're about to expire. There's also a feature to see kind of like a rolling trend line of the number of data sets in Enigma Public for a given day. So you can kind of see, for some reason, June 28th, there are less data sets overall that mention that date than, say, today. This is actually a local maxima, if you will. I don't know what's beyond the 7 days because we haven't looked at data, but it's just kind of an interesting way to compare days to another. And you can also navigate by clicking on those days, and it'll load that day's data. You can also just enter any date, and that's pretty cool too. So all this talk about Next.js, well, what exactly is it? It's a minimalistic framework for server-rendered React applications. Those are their words, not mine. But what that means is it's very tailored for server-side rendering in the sense that you don't have to do anything extra. You can just write React, and as long as you follow a few basic rules, you're going to get server-side rendering for free. It also has simple routing. So the creators of Next kind of started with this idea of static routes around pages. So you can have a component that represents a page, and you can then throw that into a pages folder, and you automatically get routing to that component. So if you have an about page, you throw about.js into the pages folder, and as long as it has a working render function, you're going to get that route served at /about, which is really cool. The other really cool thing for performance is that there's automatic code splitting on those static routes. So whatever you have in the disparate routes, if you deep link into the about page and you have some like crazy graph viz on some other route, you're not going to load that because it's all bundled according to the route, which is really cool. One of the benefits for The other benefit for server-side rendering that isn't related to performance is related to metadata. So Next.js has its own version of the HTML head tag. And what you can do is pass props into that, and it will update in real time. It will also pick up the state of your application if you deep link into it, and you will get that rich metadata as if it were server-side rendered, because it is. The only real tricks to making sure that server-side rendering works in Next.js is you have to use a special function that they provide, which is called getInitialProps. This is kind of like the way to bootstrap the application to set its initial props or state before it's rendered by the server. So as long as you don't do anything crazy in there that can't be also run on the server, you should be fine. Things like fetch, there's an alternative to the web API fetch called isomorphic fetch, which works on the server and the client. So you can just fetch to your heart's content, and you don't have to worry about the server not being able to understand that. The other cool thing about Next that I had trouble getting used to is that the styles, by default, they offer this thing called styled JSX. So styled JSX is essentially like a scoped per component style that is injected as if it was a React component. So what you can do is you can specify some global styles for your entire application, but then you can specify your component styles, and they're not going to bleed out into the other components. And this actually, I found that this promotes like compartmentalizing and really breaking your components down into subcomponents. I have a personal tendency to make my components too large. So this was like a thing that forced me to say, hold on, these styles are getting crazy. I need to break stuff down into smaller pieces. So I think that's good. And then, as I said, it supports static routing. It can support dynamic routing, which is something that I needed for this project. So if you need that, you have to do a couple of things differently. You can either use a third-party library that supports more of like a React router style syntax for dynamic routes, or you can actually just write like a custom Express server and do it yourself. So it's kind of up to you. And then for the Enigma Public API, it's programmatic access to the world's broadest collection of public data. It's a RESTful API. It supports all the things that you can do in the Enigma Public API, so searching, filtering, statistics, and other things. It's free. Even with an account, it's free, but you get an additional feature. You can export data into a CSV format if you want to work on it locally. And so for this project, I used the datasets endpoint, and I also used the dataset summary endpoint, and that's the summary endpoint is how I was able to display the counts of the datasets per day. So you can give the dataset summary endpoint a query as if you were requesting those datasets, but in fact, it will just tell you an aggregation and a few statistics about the datasets that would come back in your query without actually giving you the query. So the other problem here is that when I showed you that date inline in text, that was just one of many possible formats. Humans understand dates in many ways. People that are entering this data, who knows what they're going to put, if they're going to put the day first, if they're going to put the month first. Some of it is local to your locale, like in your country or your province or where you live in the world. Some of it has to do with language, but at the end of the day, we can't be sure what people are going to use. So I basically had to come up with like the most popular date formats and then concatenate that like an OR query and try to get all of them that way. And so that's kind of like a brute force way. I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but at least for the initial prototype, that's what I settled on. So as far as successes for this project, the trend line thing was really cool. Everyone likes a line viz. But what I really want to do with that is to expand it a little bit more and try to see trends on like a monthly or even a yearly basis. And so that's kind of in some of the next steps that I'll be describing. There's also like a lot of weird insights that you'll stumble on that you didn't even know were there. The one thing that I noticed is that there are an insane amount of tilapia fillets that are expiring on a given day. And you might think I'm kidding, but almost every day that I look up, there's like all these shipments and the tilapia is expiring. So it makes me wonder, where is it and who's about to eat it? And if I could only warn them. Then I think the other success was learning Next.js because, like I said, if I didn't have an idea for a project, I may not have had the impetus to learn this new thing. And so I think that's a big takeaway from this as well. This is a shot of the tilapia. So yeah, there's some tilapia that expired last Friday, so I hope none of you ate it. So some of the failures from this project, some of the date formats are not foolproof, especially when they're fed. The queries are fed to Elasticsearch, and so there's some false positives for the date formats, and I need to sort of refine the way that I'm, like the syntax that I'm using to do these queries, and I think we'll get better results. A lot of the data is dry or uninteresting. Some of it has to do with the fact that a lot of public data is split into many subtables, and there might be like a foreign key that joins all of them. And so if you're only looking at one of those tables, you're not getting the whole picture, and it might even just feel like you don't have enough context to understand what the data means. And then with regard to the counts that I was talking about earlier, I really wanted to start developing some mechanism for caching that, because if there's multiple people looking at the same times a day, Enigma Public isn't getting so much data in that those counts are always changing like hour by hour or day by day. So I think if like one person requests a crazy date, we could just cache that for a while and then refresh it as needed. So some of the next steps, I'd like to write a custom server or use what I think is the community's gold standard for React router style routes. It's called Next routes, to kind of like make the dynamic routing better and to offer an easier way to create dynamic routes, because it's kind of a pain. I also want to try to use natural language processing on the data sets to try to give a summary of the data set, so that you're not just looking at tabular data, you're looking at like an interpretation of it, like almost like a headline or something. And then I would like to cache more, and then I would also like to detect other dates in the data. Because you can remember, if there's one date in text, there's often more. There might be like tilapia best by date, tilapia shipment date. And so if we can identify those, I could create links and then navigate all through the tilapia. So the next step is really just to have like a tilapia website. I think this is really the only takeaway is tilapia. So in conclusion, try to start small with a concrete idea. Pick something that you want to learn, and it doesn't matter what idea you have for the project. I think you should just go for it, and at the end you'll have a new project, and you'll also have this thing like, I can do something in Next, and I couldn't before. And it's all because you had a good idea. So that's all I've got. That's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me. The site is live at publicdata.today, but that will be changing soon to tilapia.today. The repo is below. I'm serious. If you want to contribute to this, I'd be happy to try to work with you. And Enigma is always hiring, so feel free to reach out. So thanks.
Questions? Raise your hand high so you can see it.
Hi, my question is, so now that you know Next.js, any else is not Angular?
Sorry, can you repeat?
You also Angular, right, experience?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so do you now know like when you would use Next.js versus Angular, or what are the pros and cons versus?
I follow a loose rule of thumb that's basically don't use Angular. But to be perfectly, sorry, that's kind of mean. No, Angular was important to me in a certain time of my life, and that still sounds bad. I think at this point, I'm just all in on React, and I'm not looking back. So, but I have very fond memories. So.
Anyone else?
questions? Okay, this is like very context dependent on. Okay, I didn't say this at all correctly. So how did you come upon the whole Tilapia situation? Like not to extend the joke longer, but like how did that come about?
It came about because what I said earlier is true. We're like, I looked at the data millions of times for like a given day, and I was like, the tilapia is always there.
It's always there?
I mean, I'll tell you what, I will compile some rough statistics about just the tilapia, and maybe we'll do a blog post or something, and but it's not a joke. There's a lot of tilapia.
Sounds kind of fishy.
Right, so just to update you, we have 23, I think, viewers on YouTube. I want to invite Matthew for the next talk. So give a round of applause.
Am I good? Does that mean yes? OK, I'm just going to get started. So my talk is titled Active Record in JavaScript. This might be sort of a cryptic title, and hopefully it'll be made clear as we get started. So before we start, I have a confession to make. I like to build my own tools. And many smart and experienced developers will tell you not to do it. And I also think you should not do it, as a rule of thumb. But sometimes I just can't help myself, and I want to write my own framework or write my own library. And not to rationalize my awful hack jobs, but I do think it's a good way to learn about what you're using and grow as a developer. So today, I'm going to talk about a tool that I've built. At Call9, this is where I work. We develop a telemedicine service that lets doctors remotely treat emergency patients by the bedside. And it's driven by a web platform with a React front end. And so here's the outline of what we're going to be talking about. One, I'm going to talk about the problem that I attempted to solve, the solution that we've come up with, and then a very cool extension, which will hopefully expose people to something they haven't seen before, which is JavaScript proxies. And feel free to stop me at any time if there are questions. There is going to be code on the screen. If you're near the back, you might want to get close to a screen to really get the most out of this. So what's the problem? A lot of the front-end shops now are running a certain stack, which is React, which you're all familiar with, I would hope, Redux. And can I get a show of hands who's worked with Redux before? OK, almost everyone. And the last technology, which does not have its own swirly logo, so I went ahead and made one for myself, is Normalizer. Can I get a show of hands who's used Normalizer before? OK, so fewer than I expected. I will be explaining what Normalizer does briefly. So I'm going to lay out an example, which we're going to use for the rest of this to elucidate what's going on. Imagine you're making an application which is a blog or something. And it's backed by a database with 3 tables, users, posts, and comments. And comments has foreign keys to posts and users. Posts has foreign key to users. And this is just your regular hobbyist project you're working on. You might have an API which looks something like this. So you're making queries, and it'll return a JSON object which has nested elements. So you've got a post at the top level, comments nested in that, and the users for the comments nested in there. Hopefully everyone has seen something like this before. And what Normalizer does is it takes your denormalized data, so this nested JavaScript object, and turns it into normalized data. So it'll extract out each of the different types of objects here and put them in these pseudo tables in your Redux store. The nomenclature they use is entities in the Redux package, or the normalizer package. And so that's what I'll be calling them. So in this example, we have 3 of these entity tables, posts, users, and comments. Each has a key of the ID, that's the server ID, and then the content in there. Does anyone have any questions about this before I move on? OK, great. So how's this done? When you're using Normalizer, you have to define a schema, much like you have a database schema, which describes the relationship between your tables. You have in your front end a normalizer schema, which describes the relationships between your objects. And the problem is this. Imagine we're here, we have our normalized data, and we want to display the names of people who have commented first on a user's post. It's sort of contrived for this, but bear with me. So what you might do, you can maybe think of this as a who's following me or something feature. So what would we do? If we have an ID of the users who were trying to display their post commenters, we would find the ID of their user ID in the post table. Then we would look at the comments IDs, go look up those IDs in the comments table, then find the user IDs, do another join to the users table, and there we have the names. This is pretty standard fare for someone working on a back-end application. You're doing regular table joins. But in front-end code, naively, this looks pretty messy. So this is how you would implement this if I'm using no other tools but just Redux. And one, it's a lot of code. It's maybe a little bug-prone. You have more lines. But I think the worst problem is it's really not clear what this does at a glance. If you're working on a team with other developers, being able to quickly see what code is doing is really valuable. And this does not let you do that. So what else could we do? People may be familiar with Redux, ORM, or Reselect, all great tools. What we're going to be doing is drawing inspiration from another framework, which is Rails. Rails, not a front-end framework. It's, for those of you who don't know what Rails is, I see someone applauding, thank you. I also think Rails is a great framework. It's for servers, and you can also serve static pages. I started working in Rails maybe 4 years ago, and if I had to give it a motto or a slogan, it would be Rails, where things work, but you don't know why. Anyone who's worked in Rails maybe can relate to this. So the biggest feature, at least for me, in Rails is active record, and it lets you write code like this. So if you can't see the screen, it's user.find with an ID.post, and you're doing a map to comments.first.user.name. It's very readable. It's pretty clear what it does. However, as a developer who had not come from Rails, trying to work on a big code base, it's a little confusing at first. You're thinking, you know, what are these functions doing? Where are they defined? They're not in the code base. And Rails does it for you. These are defined implicitly based on how you've set up the models and reading your schema. And so that can be a frustrating or magical moment, depending on who you are. And I want to be able to create that in a Redux application. So on the left, we have what we could write in active record. On the right, we would have what we would write with plain Redux. And what we're going to develop is a tool that lets us write syntax like the active record query, but in Redux. So we're going to be able to select our user, call a post function, map through the post, call the comments function, and have a much more readable piece of code. I'm getting some nods, so I'm going to assume everyone's on board with this. So what is our solution? There's 3 parts that I'm going to go through. First, we're going to inspect the normalizer schema in the same way Rails would read your database schema. And that'll give us the tools we need to programmatically build these objects. 2, we're going to define the interface, which is what we'll expose to the users to be able to use our query system to make these objects. And 3, we're going to get into the real details of how we would build the objects that enable these queries. So first, let's look at the normalizer schema. If you go into the console and take this file and open up your Chrome console and print out the whole import of this file, it looks like this. So it's a big JSON object, which I have recreated for us here. So again, these are our 3 tables. These are the relations. And normalizer represents it like this. So on the left, we have keys, and on the right, we have stuff that's in those keys. And the real internal details of what the keys are named and whatnot, we don't need to go into. This is more or less what you have access to. So on the left, I'm going to use some specific names here. If you're reading the code, the names can get a little confusing, so I've annotated them for you. On the far left, the keys have names like post, user, comment. I'm going to call those the entity names. Each of those is associated with a table name, which is the plural, post, users, comments. And each of these has associations, which are the relations you define. And the association name will be something like author or comments. And the association is a reference to these entities again. So here they are out of the console dump that we got before. And it's all there. You don't need to understand this entirely. You just have to trust me. We can get that data. OK, so inspect the normalizer schema. Done. So defining our interface. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what we did before. For each entity, we're going to define two functions, which will be the entire interface to the users of our framework. First is a function which takes a single ID, returns a single object. The second is a function which takes an array of IDs, returns an array of objects. So in total, we're going to have 6 functions at the end of this, and that's all we want. And here's our first temporary implementation. What's going on here is there's some boilerplate around. I have a function which takes in the normalizer schema as an argument, and we're going to return these selectors that we're going to use. So at the top, this is just grabbing that information that I pointed out earlier. It's grabbing the entity name, the table name, the associations. And the real interesting part here, which is perhaps not that interesting right now, we're defining 2 functions. One which takes a single ID and simply does a query into the Redux state and returns a JSON object. And the second which takes an array of IDs, loops through those arrays, and maps them to the first function. So if we use this, well, if we use this as it is, it sort of does what we want to. But as far as our interface goes, these 6 functions are all we need. And so what would happen if we use this? Here's an example invoking our function that we just wrote, where we would select a post with an ID, and it would just return the JSON object. This is not very exciting. This is what would happen if you're not trying to do make your own dangerous tool. But it's very close to what we want. So if we can imagine we would just want some function which takes what we have at the top and transforms it into a function which has the same attributes, but the attributes of the author and comments are some function which is going to return more objects. And it's a function that's going to take IDs and return objects. This is almost exactly what we just said we were defining before. Right? We can somehow just have this select based on the ID. Then would it just work? And the answer is maybe. So let's try it. Here I'm defining, well, this is what we had before. All I need to do is change one function. Because the plural form is only making calls to the singular form, I'm going to redefine this function. It takes maybe 8 lines. And all we're doing here is selecting that same JSON object I was talking about before out of the state, making a copy. That's what object.assign does to an empty object. And then looping through the associations and overwriting that value with the with a function that uses the selector I just defined. And some people might look at this and be worried, do we have some sort of circular logic here? Are we going to end up with an infinite loop? And the answer is no. Because we're defining this as an inline function, this doesn't get evaluated when the objects are built. This gets evaluated when you call it. So everything's going to be fine. So does it work? And it's so close, except we're missing a small detail where I've used the key to be the index into our list of functions, the key being the association name, which is something like author. But we only defined 6 functions. It was user, users, post, post, comment, comments. So we have to do a little bit of ugly work to build an object which will allow us to take the association names, author, and give us the entity names, user. So we want to build an object like this. And here's another chunk of code. You do not need to understand what's going on here. We're using the normalizer internals to just build that map from author to user. And all we have to do to make our code work is substitute in where we had the key before the value out of this hash. And so does it work? This whole thing is about, this is 8 lines, and there was that block before. Maybe we have 30 lines of code here. And it does work. And it's surprising that this little block of code is able to give us powerful syntax where you can see I can select a comment with an ID, gives me the object. I can select that comment and then query for the user, and it'll automatically give me that object. And I can arbitrarily call deep nested queries, and it behaves just like it's active record. And so we can even go back and write our who comments on my posts function. And so we're done. It seems like we have everything we want. And the last thing I want to talk about is, can we go further? I do not recommend anyone actually use what I'm about to tell you. But it is very cool. And so if we have the time, I think let's take a look. So what are JavaScript proxies, and why am I talking about them? I'm going to start with why I'm talking about them. Bear with me. So this is great. This meets all the needs that I have to use this tool. But could we make it almost identical to active record, where I'm not doing function calls? It looks like I'm just doing object reference. And the benefits of this, one, are if you're dealing with an API which gives you normalized data, and you have code that is already working on denormalized data, this will work with denormalized data. It's as if you're going descending into a nested object. And the other reason to do this is it's pretty cool. So what are JavaScript proxies? JavaScript proxies let you intercept and modify functionality that is built into the JavaScript runtime, at least built in before ES6. So now you can modify things like attribute assignment and attribute retrieval. What does that let you do? It lets you create some incredibly confusing development experiences. In general, this is a thing that you should not do lightly. But how do you do it? So if you're using a browser that has ES6 compatibility or transpiling down to something that will be able to, that will transpile this down to plain JS, you have something called new proxy. And this takes 2 arguments, a target, which is the object to be augmented, and a handler, which describes the way you're going to augment the behavior. And the particular way we're going to augment our behavior in this example is we're going to use handler.get, which takes two arguments, the object that this is being called on and the property being accessed. I think this is way easier to understand in an example. So here is something that will replace all undefined references by the number 42. And you can see I'm just defining the get function to say, is this attribute already in the object? If not, return 42. And it works. It's amazing how so few lines of code can ruin your code base. So here's an example of logging out all the accesses on a particular object. And there are a lot of more things you can do with JavaScript proxies. You can intercept assignment as well and do a lot of things like write your own custom validation on objects themselves. The documentation is pretty good. If you Google JavaScript proxies, you'll find some cool code. OK, so how do we use this in our tool? It's remarkably simple. All I'm doing is taking the raw attributes and replacing the function where we looped through and assigned those elements as functions to be short-circuited using the get handler. And so we have this function. It checks if the key is in the association names. If it is, it uses the exact same line of code we wrote before. And after we write this, it's remarkable. We're writing active record code. This runs in the front end, and we can write our queries however we like. So there are some things we didn't cover here. What we built at Call9 has a bit more functionality, which we'll probably be open sourcing soon. Some things that you might want in this framework, which it doesn't have, is custom model methods, the way you would define model methods in Rails. There's some performance overhead we have when we're defining those functions on each instantiation. Single table inheritance, also very cool if you're working with a Rails backend. And you could memoize to go faster. But that is all that I have. The code is all available at my GitHub, and Call9 is hiring right now. You guys can shoot me an email or come talk to me afterward if you have any questions. Thanks. It's hard to say. As a rule of thumb, I would recommend generally don't do it if you're working on a team, especially. The times we've used metaprogramming are, one, when it's pretty intuitive and simple. You don't want to do something like I had in the previous slide where you're overriding basic behavior. Extending functionality in an intuitive way, and something that'll really save you a lot of time if you think it's worth it. There's a lot of benefits, but there is the cost that it's harder to onboard new people, and people won't understand your code. I hope that answers your question.
That's true. Okay. Another question?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi.
It's a really great time. I really enjoyed it. I think one of the things that I come into when working with proxies is that it's kind of hard to figure out like what things are available in terms of like because they can intercept all the messages. You don't necessarily know that that is not available because you log out and it just doesn't show up.
Right.
Did you do anything to like be able to actually introspect on the objects and stuff?
So when you say what methods are available, do you mean like for you to intercept using the proxies, or after you've proxied something, what methods are available on that object? I think you can, so the question was, if you proxy an object, how do you know what's available in your new metaprogrammed monster object? And the answer is, you sometimes don't if it's written a certain way. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm pretty sure you can, as part of the proxying process, also override the interface which tells the JavaScript runtime what methods are available. So if you're writing a meta-programmed library, you should probably update that as well so people can see what's available. OK. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks.
Cool. Now, before we get to the break, there's our traditional thing. So we're going to need you all to pull up your phones.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'll just leave you here on stage.
Don't leave me. No. I need electricity. It's working? HDMI. Thank you. Are you ready for our traditional quiz? Let's make sure it works.
Check the stream. Is the stream all right?
Right.
Got it?
Yep. I think so. Yeah, loading. That's it. Full screen.
Use your tethering or LT.
Yeah, you've got like a minute to. Alright, get ready for our traditional quiz, the only quiz in town where you don't get any prizes. So don't put out your phones, there's absolutely no reason to do this quiz because you don't get enough. It's just a waste of time. Where are you? Come on. Go to Kahoot.it. One. Is anyone trying to connect?
Two people.
Two people? It's waiting for players. Sure? Anyone experience any problems?
Does it work?
Yeah, alright, let's give it another try.
Let's reload.
Let's reload.
Unplug it and replug it.
Yeah. Alright. Let's give it another try.
If it doesn't work, turn off your phone and then turn it on again. Okay.
And no one, waiting for players. Kahoot.it, put the code. Nothing? For the first time?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, what's going on? Still connecting? Alright.
Who's trying to connect?
Yeah, everyone's right. Maybe you should up with the live phone. Alright, I don't know.
One bar.
doesn't work, we're going to get to a break-in, we're going to fix it, hopefully.
Yeah.
And we're going to try it again.
So let's give it like 10 seconds.
Yeah, let's give it about 10 seconds.
So I will reload the game again and maybe we'll get lucky. Classic.
Wait, it's loading. It's still loading.
Loading. Still loading. Alright, let's try. Which one to connect?
They let us down. Oh, let us down.
Alright, that's interesting. So what do we do?
Next time we do hackathon for this Kahoot.
Yeah?
It's a bad karma. Next time, let Ilya try it.
It's the first time it's happening.
Alright?
Alright, so
So,
I think,
12-minute break then?
yeah, we'll try to fix it. Yeah?
12-minute break, we start at 7:40, hopefully with the fix.
Everyone, please. Come back to the seat. All right, everyone. Everyone, please take your seat. Can you hear me, everyone? Is there anyone who's still trying to connect?
Yeah.
All right, better? No. Right, yeah. No. What have we got? 31 people. Is it, anyone still trying to connect without success? No? Everyone? Up? I can see there still connecting. Let's give it like 5 more seconds and start. So 5, 4, 2, 1. Alright, so welcome to our traditional quiz. You know the rules. Yeah, you answer questions. You don't know the rules. Sorry. You answer questions, and while you're answering your questions, we're taking everything out of your phone. So we show you your email, we're putting all your contacts and your pictures. That's the rule. So you're like playing, you're not worried about nothing, and we use your private data. So are you ready? You'll get 20 seconds for each question. Okay, up and running. Do you know React, people? Go for it. Many of you know React. And if you know Angular, turn the music. It's going to be very loud. Alright, great news. Most of you know how to react. I move forward because we short in time. Are you looking for a job? Very important question. Who's hiring? Is there anyone here hiring? Raise your hand. Right? All the people who are seeking for a job, this table, this round table, is the table of people that are hiring. Alright, so talk with them. Maybe it's your lucky day. Yeah. Which code editor do you use? Like those dancers? Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a job, you probably don't use any code editor. I've got a feeling about VS Code, I don't know why. And we've got other. Sublime, Atom, yeah, all the hipsters that use Vue.js. I'm a front developer because, please be honest, it makes me happy. To make friends, it's a pretty valid answer. We don't have any social life anyway. This is my social. If you can't sing, you better be a front developer. 11 singers. Next, what would you do for your ReactNYC community? Yeah, please contribute back. Look at this person on the picture. He's growing fresh vegetables for us. We made the pizza out of his vegetables. True story. All right. 9 people willing to do a tattoo, please raise your hand. Yeah. Come speak with me later. Did you ever try React Native? I'm vegan. Be honest, it's completely anonymous. And besides, we only care about your private data that we're pulling out of your phones. We don't really care about your answers. And we've got 7 vegans. Raise your hand. Oh, I saw you eat pizza. So, I'm sorry. No, I only the part without cheese. It's right. Why do you come to ReactNYC? Last question. Help us improve those meetups for you. Are you hungry? Which is fine. I mean, we're here for you. And today we provide food for 11 people. So thank you very much. As I said, there is no prizes, there is no reason for you to do this quiz, but I'd like to thank you and let's move forward to our next step. Right? Go on. Fast.
Round of applause for Aaron.
Check. You guys hear me?
Got it. Put it to your back pocket. Gotcha. Thank you, brother. All right. You can see that? Excellent. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Aaron, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we get started. I went from rapping on tracks, so that is me on the bottom with my radio named Marquise. She's beautiful, 10D batteries, gorgeous. I went from rapping on tracks to working on tracks. 10 years with a pension and the MTA. Hold on. The MTA, I was a slave for the man. That don't deserve applause. I went from rapping to working to JavaScript awesomeness. Now that, come on, nerd credentials. You know what I'm saying? So for all my nerds and my nerdettes, I used to go by Quest the Wordsmith, and now I like to go by the Codesmith with a Q. You know, a little reminiscence from my, my life back on the mic days. But right now, I want to give a shout out to the company that I recently left. Hint, hint, they are hiring at least one front-end developer because I'm no longer there. Transfix, dope company. It was hard to leave, I kid you not. So if you could get in and you're a front-end developer and you know what you're doing, you need to go holler at this man right here with the Mets cap on. He's the man. He's all right. But you can email a guy named James Gallagher, whatever. He's Irish, so maybe it's a her, Gallagher. Anyway, he's the internal recruiter. Really dope guy, loves hip hop, so he got my heart. But I'm also at Bloomberg right now. I wish I could tell you more, but today was my first day, so I don't really know too much. I know they got a lot of fruits and veggies over there, so I'm with that. And again, I'm Aaron. That's my info. This slideshow is a React app itself, so you can clone the repo and keep all the information in there this way, and then you can click the emails. All right? So why don't we keep it moving? componentDidGenerate. That is not a life cycle. That's just a weird catchphrase to say that I built my own Create React app. And let me talk about Create React app real quick. Pretty much everybody has used Create React app. It's simple. With one swipe of the, I don't know, your fingertips, you can spin up a whole new React app. You get up and running very quickly, and it abstracts a lot of the nonsense that's going on under the hood. So you could just focus on building what it is you're trying to build. And it's React, so I mean, there's that. But I had a few cons with it on my own personal projects, and the major one was it doesn't come with Sass built in. And it was just annoying for me to constantly shim in Sass all the time. And then once I got used to shimming in Sass all the time, then I had to also add Redux. And for most apps, at least on the side, I was throwing in Redux and doing my thing. So, and then this is it's not necessarily a con, but there's no back-end option. Man, that looked microscopic. Is that better? All right. Anyway, so there was no back-end attached to it. And what I mean is generating an app didn't come with a back-end already pre-built, ready to roll. So those were the things. And one of the pros, which was it abstracted a lot of stuff away from you, in the long run became a con for me, because magic is fun until I want to know how. And I'm curious, so I don't want you to do something for me. I want to do it myself. Or at least I want to know how you're doing your magic, because at the end of the day, it's all JavaScript anyway. So if somebody else could do it, then why can't I? So I like building my own tools. So I resonate with that. And this was, don't hate me, but I don't like using Yarn. I never felt the need to use Yarn. I don't care if it takes a second and a half faster than installing. I'm not NPM installing all day long. I'm writing code. So, plus we ran into a whole bunch of mess of issues with Yarn, and I had no idea, and I had to ask him, and I don't like asking him, so But introducing create new app. It's italicized, which means I did it. All right. So what I set forth to do was build my own React app generator. And I wanted to keep it, I was heavily inspired by create React app, right? So it had to stay simple, command, 1, 2, 3, generate an app. I definitely wanted to include Sass, because I wasn't going through that song and dance all the time. It can include Redux optionally, a whole bunch of other stuff optionally, Express, MongoDB. So you can generate one little command, very simple, and we'll go through it in a minute. And you can have a whole back end with Mongo ready to go. You got to fill in the blanks, make your own endpoints, et cetera, but it's all set up for you. And it uses Webpack 4. I kind of got like a little OCD where, I'm just getting used to Webpack 3 and all of its mystery, and then they go and release 4. And I'm like, well, I have to use it. There's no good reason to use it, but I have to use it because it's out there. And then to use Webpack 4, then I had to use all the scope new Babel packages. So, but anyway, so I could, do one of these and be like, yeah, it's using Webpack 4, you know what I'm saying? So anyway. Oh yeah, I already said it uses the latest scoped Babel packages. So I don't know if you know, but they just consolidated to a mono repo, which is nice. So everything on NPM is at Babel / and then your plugin, whatever you're using. And it uses NPM. Good old vanilla has grown so much NPM. And for me, it was important. I didn't want to, well, I don't even know how to make a generator eject. So mine doesn't. The Webpack file has tons of, that it generates, has tons of comments. There are tons of comments through everything that this thing generates, because I feel like sometimes I'm a goldfish. I learned something, it's great, and then 7 seconds later, I don't know what I just did. So I got to leave breadcrumbs for myself all throughout everything. And so the code that it generates has those comments and breadcrumbs. So it's also a good tool to learn off of. All right. So what was my inspiration? Create React app. That was 99% of the inspiration that I had. And then a variety of shell scripts, which, man, I got lost in Google hell trying to understand how to write bash scripts. I will never do that again in my life. I'm not that smart. All right, so what was the motivation? I wanted to spin up apps really quickly for my own projects. So I didn't have to shim in all those other things. It included all the toys that I was playing with: Sass, Redux, Express, MongoDB, and those things were optional. It can look just like Create React App, where it's just vanilla React, or a combo of all the other things. I really wanted to learn Webpack. I felt like Webpack was this mysterious, oh my God, I don't know what this is doing. Only the elite, those smart people over there know what the heck they're doing with Webpack. And so I was determined. So I literally went every single option in Webpack. I went through their documentation. I included what I needed to make this stuff, and the rest I at least looked at. So now I got a nice, sexy Webpack file with all of the goodness and all of those breadcrumbs with links to all of the stuff so you could see it too. And then probably the biggest reason why I did this is because I can. Well, now I can say I can because I did, but I thought I could, so I tried, and it worked. You know what I'm saying? So reinventing the wheel is the only way I know how to really get under the hood and learn something. So it's a fantastic experience. So let's look at how you use this really cool My Baby Create New App. Very simple. You install it globally, the same way you install Create React App, and it's called Create New App, right? npmi-g, blah, blah, blah. And then to run it, you can type Create New App out, but it also has an alias for CNA. So CNA, your app name. It's exactly like Create React App. Same thing, right? And it will spin up a new vanilla React app for you. Or I threw in a little guided process, which we'll see in 2 seconds. Because I thought, well, maybe it's just easier, more user-friendly, and what the hell? I'm going to dive into async await and all sorts of node modules anyway. More learning. So if you just type CNA, it will then prompt you and ask you up to 4 questions and build your app. OK? So here's an example. Fancy usage, CNA, my cool app. We're going to include Redux and Express. And bam, you'll have Redux in there, Express. Sets up all the folders for you. It's got the actions folders. It's got reducers. Oh, man. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Really super fancy. I don't expect anybody to do this, but I'm proud that you can do this because it's, well, it looks cool on a slide at a React talk. Anyway, so there's so many options that you can tell what email. It will fill out all those packaged JSON entries. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. So just look at the repo. But we're going to get into this. So under the hood, I want to highlight a few things that I think are worth sharing from my learning process. This project only has 4 dependencies. The first one is a package called command line args. If you have tried your hand at parsing arguments from the command line, you will know that you have to take care. You have to take care. How do I know if the user entered multiple arguments for one flag? Things like that. So this is one package that I found that does it very well. Command line args helps you in a nice, sexy way just deal with command line arguments in Node. OK, the next one. This one's cool. Validate NPM package name. It validates NPM package names. So it makes sure that the package name is valid for NPM. Cool? All right. The third one, you really don't need it, but man, does it look real cool. If you got colors in the console, it's like, man, this is official. So Chalk. Chalk lets you put colors in your console, and I think that's cool. And then the last one is, you don't need this either, but it makes dealing with the file system in Node much easier. Node comes built in with the FS module for file system. FS Extra includes everything vanilla Node out the box, plus a bunch of stuff that you're going to need to use anyway, or you're going to write your own functions. I learned the hard way because I started writing my own functions. I felt really good about it, and then I realized I could just cut out like 300 lines of code with that. So those are the dependencies. So if you're interested in building a command line app, you might want to look into these dependencies. Another thing that I want to highlight is a built-in module in Node called readline. This is how you prompt the user with a question or whatever where they need to type a response. This is how you do it. The code is right there, but we won't get into it. But it's the readline module, and if you wrap the whole thing in like a promisey function or an async function, then you can do cool stuff with async await. which the program will just wait until the user has entered something to continue. And then this one, man, this was so simple when I finally figured out how to do it, but this was the magic. I wanted to know, how do you make something executable? You know what I'm saying? How do I install something globally where I type my command and it works, like it does the thing? And I thought this was going to be like brain surgery. There's only 2 things you need. Whatever your main entry file is, throw, what do you call this? A hash bang? Shebang? Shebang, shebang. Throw that at the top of the file, the environment, bin, environment, whatever, node, and then you combine that with a bin property in your package JSON, and bam, now you can make executable stuffs. I can't believe it was that simple, that even a caveman could do it. So I wanted to share that with you guys because that took me a while to find, and when it was so simple, I was very excited. Anyway, okay, so before we get to the conclusion, let me show you how this thing works. All right, so, oh no, let's do this. Okay. Okay, so we have a new command. We got a new prompt, and I'm going to take you through the curated, where it asks you the questions. And I'll just type CNA, very simple, and I hit enter. And as you can, I hope you can see, it says, enter a name for your app. So on the spot, because we're doing this on the spot. Okay. Okay, so now, would you like to include Redux? Why, indeed I would. And so I'm going to hit yes and hit enter. Oh man, I forgot to tell you guys. Yeah, I might be a little biased, but do you want to include Redux first router? Don't hate me. React router is very pretty and well supported. He doesn't like Redux first router, but it's really cool. But you could just hit no. How about we hit no? All right, we won't complicate life. We're going to hit no. All right. Would you like to include an Express server? Why, I think I want a backend for my application. I'm going to say yes. And you know what? I'm going to need some persistence. And because I like to write JavaScript up and down the stack, I'm going to choose MongoDB. So, bam. All right, so now this thing is, oh yeah, there's no internet. I forgot to tether. Well, nonetheless, it would have spun off. Well, you see it tried to install the dependencies, so at least, you know, you got to give me props on that. All right, we'll go back to the conclusion. So in conclusion, you can create a command line application with just a few packages, right? We all learned that. Async await plus that readline package is guided goodness. That's how I made that curated, hey, ask me one question after the other. And create a new app is a command line tool for generating React apps with a couple of goodies, namely Sass, Redux, Express, and MongoDB. Reinventing the wheel, I feel, is one of the best ways to learn, even if you don't use it. But I figured, well, you know, GitHub is free, and so I'm throwing it out there for free, and I got the name on NPM, so hashtag why not. But one other cool thing I want to show you, and this I promise, and I'm done. If you do create new app, and you do _ sandbox, do you know how many times I needed to just have a simple index.html file with a styles.css and like a main.js? Well, bam, it just made it. That's it. It just makes those three files. Oops, I forgot to do my thing. You shut up. Just do it. OK. And so it created a new sandbox app in just do it, right? And so if we look at the files, you'll see there's just the 3 files. So I usually do that sandboxing just to test something real quick. Or I just want an environment where I can write my function and see if it works in the browser, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is my talk. Try out Create New App. I'm not trying to encroach on Create React App. If anything, they were my inspiration. And this was an amazing learning process. So hopefully you might find it useful for yourself as well. Huh?
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening to this talk. For the sake of skip the question. Unfortunately, we have to leave earlier than expected. So, for those of you who've been waiting for a mysterious speaker, you will see him in two free workshops later this month, or actually in July. So, sorry, that's one of the reasons we're going to skip questions. But you get more surprises next time. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank all the speakers for coming. I want to, please round of applause. I want to say big thanks to Cordova for hosting the meetup, for providing awesome food and drinks and stuff. Amazing venue. Thank you so much. And we have to leave by 8:15. So please, let's grab everything and just run out. Thank you so much.